Welcome to the Hoosier Basketball Experience. I'm your host, Phil Eisenbarger. Today's guest brings so many critical perspectives to understanding the Hoosier Basketball Experience. Indiana high school basketball in the glory days, the early 60s, 3 city championships for the great Indianapolis, Washington, a 1965 state champion where he starred along such names as Keller and Winkler, an Indiana All-Star, a fan favorite at Purdue, where his team went to the NCAA final game in 1969 with names like Mount, Gilliam, Keller, and Farber. This longtime Purdue basketball broadcaster is a legend in so many ways. Even more impressive has been his community leadership. He has been president of the Indianapolis Rotary Club. I've been fortunate enough to serve with him on the board and executive committee of the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, where he served as president. He has worked with the city of Indianapolis and the Central Indiana Community Foundation. That list goes on and on. His commitment to Purdue includes too many volunteer positions to mention here. The way this man has navigated his way through high school and college to become the epitome of a community and alumni leader is a credit to what we call the basketball experience here in Indiana. Basketball helped make this man, but more importantly, basketball fans everywhere can be proud of how this man has given back to the game while serving his community. His name, Ralph Taylor, and you get to meet him when we come back.
The Hoosier Basketball Trivia Question, sponsored by Christy, Farrow, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question, who is the all-time scoring leader in girls IHSAA basketball? The answer after the break. Now our trivia question answered, sponsored by Christy, Farrow, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question, who is the all-time scoring leader in girls IHSAA basketball? The answer, Jackie Young.
Welcome back to the Hoosier Basketball Experience. Ralph Taylor, thank you for being here. Even though we've worked together on the Hall of Fame, it is a complete honor to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, before we get into all those accolades I mentioned in the introduction, let's talk about you and your family right now. Talk about them a little bit and what you're doing these days.
Well, currently I'm doing independent consulting work for a major foundation in the Indianapolis area. I still serve on the Big Ten Advisory Commission representing Purdue University.
Yep.
And we do have IU representative also on the commission, just
Good.
so you know. Also, I'm volunteering with different groups. I'm on the board of the Asian American Alliance. Like you pointed out, still involved with the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame, on the board of Teachers Treasures, and so I'm still keeping my hands involved in different things in the community.
Talk about your family a little bit.
Family, I'm divorced, no children, but I have 40 plus nieces, nephews, grandnieces and nephews, and one of my nephews actually just graduated this past week from University in Kansas. So I'm very proud of him. Then I had 2 nephews who played football at Wisconsin. One was on their 2000 Rose Bowl championship team. So we got Badgers in the family. My brother, he and I are the only 2 brothers who played in a state championship game for 2 different high school
is that
teams.
right?
Yeah.
Who did you play for?
My brother played at Shortridge.
Okay.
And of course, I went to Washington. He's still working.
Yeah.
He's a teacher in one of the IPS, actually one of the Lawrence Township schools.
When was Shortridge in '68 when they went to the finals?
Runner-up to Gary Roosevelt.
Wow, wow. So talk a little bit about growing up in your community and your first recollections about basketball.
First recollection was listening on the radio to the great Christmas Addicts teams play with Oscar Robertson, Willie Merriweather, Bill Scott, Bill Hampton. And living right across the street from me was James Enoch, who was on the 56 Attic State Championship team.
Sure.
So growing up as a kid, you know, the whole family, cousins and immediate family, everybody was rooting for Christmas Addicts. And I was just like them. I was rooting for Addicts. I knew the crazy song. I knew the school colors were green and gold. I knew all the players.
crazy song.
Yeah, I knew all the players from year to year.
Yeah.
And I just knew I was going to go to Crispus Attucks. And
how did that change?
well, it's an interesting story. I'll just tell the one story.
Abbreviated version.
Yeah, IPS changed school districts. So instead of students who went to the grade school I went to, which was Oscar C. McCullough School 5, which is located where the Ida Jordan Museum is located, I thought I was going to go to Attucks. Well, at the end of my 8th grade year, they assigned supposedly everyone to go to Washington, except several of my classmates went to Attucks. And then the teaching staff gave me a scholarship to go to Washington.
Okay.
Now, scholarship was not like this humongous sum of money like an NIL deal.
Sure.
Scholarship was like $50, so that was a scholarship.
$50 was $50,
Yeah,
though.
so I wound up going to Washington. Needless to say, my first couple of weeks at Washington really wasn't that happy because I wanted to be at Attucks.
With your buddies.
Yeah, and so I wind up at Washington, and it was always funny because every time we played Attucks, it was like you're killing your brother.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was always an awkward feeling, but that's...
Didn't want to win.
No, but we did.
So you go to Washington as a freshman, and the great Jerry Oliver is the coach there.
Yes.
How do you get noticed by Jerry?
Well, it was during my 8th grade year at School 5. I saw this little short white guy.
Yeah.
He was walking down the hallway, and I'm thinking he's coming to take my picture for the Indianapolis Times because I had won the spelling bee. So I'm assuming he's a photographer.
Yeah.
Turns out he's a basketball coach at Washington. And that was our first meeting. But he was one of the greatest coaches. His knowledge of the game was just really outstanding. He copied a lot of what UCLA had did during that time, like the 2-2-1 press.
Yes.
Which every time we got in trouble, we throw the press on teams and they wouldn't be able to handle it and we win the games. Just outstanding coach, also an outstanding individual.
Yeah, so for people that a lot of our folks will remember Jerry Oliver, but for those that don't, he coached obviously you and your team to the state championship. And then he went on to be an assistant and filled in as a head coach at IU, and then a long tenure with the Pacers.
And see, that's another story because when he went to IU, he left after McGinnis and Downing's junior year.
68.
68.
So, yeah.
So
Bill Green got to take
Green got to take McGinnis and Downing to state championship, but at Purdue, Billy Keller, my high school and college teammate, he was assigned to do student teaching at Washington, thinking that the thinking was he'd be able to recruit them to come to Purdue, but needless to say, when Oliver goes to IU, it was a done deal.
Yeah. Well, you got your share, as we'll talk about in a minute. You got your share. So just tell the folks a little bit. You talked about Oscar's teams and the folks on Crispus Attucks, but who were your basketball heroes other than the Crispus Attucks team?
It wasn't until I went to high school that I had other basketball heroes other than the Attucks guys. But it was like, well, from your hometown, Ron Bonham.
Yeah.
He used to shoot the jump shot over his head.
1960.
And I copied that. Wilson, it was George Wilson, who played at University of Cincinnati, went to Chicago DuSable High School. Also liked Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Elgin Baylor, Guy Rogers, not Pistol Pete, but Bob Pettit.
Great players.
Great player. Nate Thurman.
Yeah.
Howie Comives. So those were a lot of guys I really liked watching. And then there was also, you didn't have ESPN and all that. So the guys you could see on television, it wasn't like you see now where you got to see everybody, but those were the ones I admired. And then, of course, during that time, I was reading about this kid in New York. We were in the same class, but he was at Power Memorial High School. I heard about this guy named Lou Alcindor, and so that was one of the guys I thought, oh, that'd be interesting running up against him.
So freshman year, Jerry Oliver, you meet, and he ends up being your coach for the next 3 years, where you started on the varsity. Talk about your sophomore year and trying to integrate yourself into that team.
Well, sophomore year was interesting because we only had one letterman. His name was Clark Dickerson, and Clark was 6'3". So there were not very high expectations for that team. And in my 3 years playing, that was our worst team record-wise. We finished 19-4.
That was your worst record.
That was the worst record. We also won the city championship for the first time since 1947 or 48, when George Theophanis, another School 5 student, by the way, who went to Washington, was on that city championship team. I started, believe it or not, at center. And so I was a leading scorer, leading rebounder of the sophomore.
Okay.
And we get all the way to the sectional championship game, and we're on the verge of winning.
I know what's coming.
There's a loose ball scramble, and a guy by the name of Louis Dampier, all-time
Great player.
greatest.
We're going to have him on the show.
Okay, well, you remind him of that.
Yeah, I will. Did he turn your ankle on that play?
No, he picked up a loose ball and shot what would have been a three-pointer in today's standards.
Sure.
But it was a jump shot from the sideline that went in, nothing but net.
Wow.
And we got beat, and it was funny because we get beat, and then we're going home, and the song comes on the radio, "Our Day Will Come." And I'm thinking, what an ironic song. Our day won't be coming anytime soon.
But it did. But it did.
But
Louis Dampier, all-time leading scorer in the ABA. People.
Great player at Kentucky.
Could shoot. Yeah, Kentucky. I hate to mention that, but yeah. And then George Theophanis, who you mentioned, went on. Didn't he coach at Shortridge?
He coached
Your
at
brother,
Shortridge, yeah.
When they went to
Coached
the
my brother
finals
at
in
Shortridge.
'68.
Yeah.
Well, more with Ralph Taylor when we come back after these messages. Welcome back to the Hoosier Basketball Experience, today with Ralph Taylor. So we got through your sophomore year, your day will come. It comes in '65, but it almost comes in '64. Talk about the '63-'64 season, your junior year at Indianapolis, Washington.
My junior year, that was the best team we had. We had 6 guys averaging double figures. And again, I was the leading scorer and rebounder. We had great team chemistry. And we get to the sectionals, and then we have one guy with, he's having appendicitis attack.
Oh my.
Another guy's having an ankle problem. And then in the afternoon sectional semifinals, I go up for a rebound, throw the ball to Kelton. I couldn't move, not realizing I had torn a cartilage in my knee. And we get beat by Howell in championship game, which I didn't get to play in. And I'll never forget that. We get beat, and the Howell student section releases balloons in the stands, and
Wow.
we go home. And
Where was that game played?
That was played at Southport, because after, beginning of my freshman year, they moved they split the Butler sectional into Butler and Southport. So we were always assigned to Southport. But that was one of the best seasons Washington ever had. We were, up until that defeat, we were 21-1. And we wind up 21-2.
Yeah.
But that was the best team we ever had, and I thought, man, that's.
Yeah. We've talked before about a lot of the names on your Washington teams. One that you and I have talked about before is Larry Highball, and we're talking about people like yourself and later on like McGinnis and Downing. But I think you told me one time you think Larry Highball was the best athlete to ever play at Indianapolis, Washington.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, football is outstanding. Track and field was outstanding, and people might not remember this, but his senior year at Washington High School as the lead guard, he averaged over 17 points a game.
Wow, and a great track athlete, right?
Great track athlete. He was only 5'9", but he could dunk.
Yeah.
Just outstanding.
Then he went to IU to play football with my brother.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we'll mention some of those other folks as we talk about the 1965 year where you go to Butler Fieldhouse to win a state championship. But before we get there, talk a little bit about the season and how you got there.
Well, we entered the season again not really knowing how we were going to be. We only had 2 lettermen, myself and my great friend and teammate, classmate Billy Keller. And so again, expectation not that much. We didn't have any size because the 2 tallest starters were 6'3", and Billy was 5'10". Our other guard, Bob, was 5'11". Winkler was 6 foot, maybe 150 on a good day. Yeah. And then Glasson and Bill Rogers, they alternated at the other forward spot. So we, for whatever reason, we just clicked. And we didn't have the same amount of talent that we had the previous year, but everything came together. We had won like 19 games in a row, and 2 losses that year were to Manual and Howell during the regular season. both games were played at Indiana Central, standing room only crowds. And during the tournament, we got on a run because we realized that we could just get out of the sectional.
Sure.
We could never get out of sectional. So we beat Howell in the sectional semifinal. Then we beat Manual, who really had a great team this year. They were led by Mike Hargraves, who was 6'5", just outstanding
Great player.
And we beat Manual to win the sectional championship. And that was like a monkey off our back because we thought, man, we finally got over the hump. Yeah. So we proceeded to beat Ben Davis in the regional. And then we beat Anderson.
Yeah.
With the great Kenny Johnson. Kenny was about 6'4", 6'5",
got a great
great
story
athlete.
for you on Kenny.
Then we move on and we beat Muncie South and Brookville.
Yeah.
And then we get to the Final Four. And of course, Gary Roosevelt was favored to win. They were ranked number 1, and we were like number 5 or number 6. And my uncle, late uncle, he told me after the game that he had bet a couple $100 on Gary Roosevelt.
I'm glad he lost.
He didn't like me after that.
I'm glad he lost the bet.
But so we defeated Fort Wayne North in championship game. It was just a dream come true. And I think it, more importantly, not only did we win the state championship, but it just united so many different diverse communities that fit into Washington High School.
Yeah. So going back to the season before the tournament, you all were getting such fan support that I've read that a lot of your games were played at Butler Fieldhouse or at Indiana Central.
Yeah, we only played 2 home games that year because of the large fan support we had, not just from Washington High School students and alumni, but from throughout the central Indiana area, and that was just really fantastic.
Yeah. Talk about my favorite gym in the entire world, now Hinkle Fieldhouse, then Butler Fieldhouse, and your recollections about that place.
Well, that was such a great place to play. I mean, the atmosphere, you couldn't touch it. And the floor was just, I mean, if you couldn't jump, you played on the Hinkle floor, you might be able to jump at least 5 inches higher, yes. But it was just a great venue for high school basketball. It was like the Mecca. It was like where everybody wanted to wind up playing.
Sure.
And by the way, one of the equipment guys at Hinkle Fieldhouse, Butler Fieldhouse, was Charlie McElfresh. And Charlie and I, we started talking, found out during this time that we were playing there that he was also a School 5 alum. So there's a lot of connections with School 5.
So talk a little bit about the fact that there's been a lot written about the fact that your team was an integrated team, that sometimes you started 3 black players, sometimes you started 2 black players. But talk about how basketball brought you all together.
Well, I guess it's interesting because we never talked about it.
There you go.
We never talked about it, and coming from School 5, you know, the grade school was integrated, so going to Washington, which was integrated, wasn't a big deal, just something we never talked about. We never had any problems. So even when we went on the road, there were never any discussions or problem regarding race. It was just the fact that we were there representing different diverse communities. I came from School 5, which was an integrated neighborhood, but Keller and Bop both came from all white neighborhoods.
Yeah.
We had other kids come from, well, Bill Rogers came from Hallville, which was all black. Mark Glassing came from Stringtown, which was Appalachia.
Yeah, yeah.
And Highball also came from the Hallville area, but it was never a discussion that we had. Our goal was just simply go out and play and do the best you can at all times, and the ultimate goal was to try to win the state championship.
Sure. You talked a little bit earlier about Jerry Oliver and the press that you all used routinely, and I know maybe not as much your senior year unless you needed it, but talk about how that impacted the games.
Well, I think if we were sluggish or we were trailing, especially last 4 or 5 minutes of the game, we would throw the press on teams, and that would just pick up the tempo, force them into turnovers, and it would always help us win. And when we won the state championship game against Fort Wayne North, we threw the press on them in the last 5 minutes of the game. That really turned the tide and helped us to win.
And was it a 2-2-1 zone press?
2-2-1 zone press, and just like today, when teams get pressed, they invariably want to throw the ball to the sideline, where they get double teamed. Yeah, for the trap.
Yeah.
It's like something you should correct in junior high.
Yeah, well, Jerry knew when to pull it out,
Yes.
and you all knew how to execute it.
Yeah, and actually we went to a clinic our senior year, and we demonstrated the press to the coaches that were there.
Final game, if I remember looking at the stat sheet, 9 free throws for
Yes.
you. You went to the free throw line 9 and hit 9, most of anybody there, and had, what, 13 or 14 points?
13, 14 points, and the thing I also remember is that Eddie Bopp really had a sterling tournament that time, and it was also
He ends up the Trester Award winner.
Trester Award winner. Of course, my great teammate Billy Keller winds up Mr. Basketball, and that was, we played Fort Wayne North, whose front line was 6'8", 6'5", 6'4". The guards were 6'3", 6'2".
Wow. And then Winkler was an all-star the next year,
Yeah.
right? So
Played with
two
Rick Mount.
loaded teams.
Yeah.
Two loaded teams. Well, this has been great talking with Ralph Taylor about the Hoosier basketball experience, and we're fortunate enough that we'll have Ralph on the show for next week, Friday at 9:30. So join us next week again with Ralph Taylor to hear about the Hoosier basketball experience. Thanks for joining us on the Hoosier basketball experience. Next week, we'll have Ralph Taylor back. We'll talk about Purdue going to the final game in 1969 with a player named Rick Mount and a whole host of others, as well as Ralph's time after Purdue. A Purdue broadcaster, a community leader, you won't want to miss it. Join us for the Hoosier basketball experience next week at 9:30.